It was a bone-chilling evening in early January when Sarah, tired of the holiday rush, decided to take a solo trip to her family's cabin in the woods. The cabin, located an hour's drive from the nearest town, was old but cozy, nestled in the heart of a dense forest that seemed to swallow the road as you drove further into it. She had spent many winters there as a child, and although she hadn't been in years, it felt like the perfect way to disconnect and recharge. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the forest in a pristine layer of white. The world felt quieter out here, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that made the air feel thick. Sarah didn't mind it. She was used to the solitude. By the time she arrived, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The cabin's porch light flickered in the distance, a welcoming beacon in the sea of snow. Sarah grabbed her bag and walked quickly to the door, eager to settle in for the night. The wind howled behind her, but she was used to the harshness of winter here. She stepped inside, the old door creaking as she pushed it open. The warmth hit her immediately, and she let out a sigh of relief. She hadn't realized how cold she'd become. The cabin, though small and simple, had a comforting feeling to it. Rustic furniture, a stone fireplace, the faint scent of pine from the surrounding woods. It was perfect for a getaway. After starting a fire in the hearth, Sarah made herself a cup of tea and wrapped herself in a blanket. The storm outside was growing worse, and she thought it was a good idea to stay in and enjoy the peace. But as the minutes passed, she began to feel something shift in the air, an odd sensation crawling up her spine. The wind had picked up, howling against the windows, but there was something else. A sound, a faint thud like something heavy was moving in the snow outside. Sarah frowned, trying to shake off the growing unease. Maybe it was an animal, something large, trying to find shelter. Still, she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that the sound wasn't right. It didn't seem like an animal at all. She stood up and walked over to the window, peering out into the snowy night. The wind howled across the trees, but there was nothing there, no movement, nothing out of the ordinary. She exhaled and turned back to the fire, trying to laugh it off. Maybe she was just overtired from the drive. But the thud came again. Her heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable now. Someone, or something, was out there. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, trying to reason with herself. The nearest neighbors were miles away. The snowstorm had made sure of that. It was impossible for anyone to be out there in these conditions, but the sound continued, a rhythmic thud, closer this time. Her pulse quickened. Should she go out and check? No, that would be dangerous in this storm. Instead, she grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and checked the door. It was locked, of course, but the feeling of vulnerability gnawed at her. The wind raged outside, but the noise was still there. Closer now. Thud. 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 It was almost at the door. Suddenly there was a scraping sound on the porch, like something dragging across the wood. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her first instinct was to run, but she couldn't move. She could hear the scraping getting louder, like something, or someone, was trying to get inside. Then silence. Her mind raced. Was it the wind, a raccoon, or was someone really out there? She held her breath, listening intently. The cabin creaked as the wind battered against it, but that was all. No scraping, no thudding. She walked cautiously to the door, her hands shaking as she reached for the handle. Just before she could touch it, the porch light flickered and went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Her heart began to pound in her chest. Something wasn't right. Then a loud crash. The sound came from behind her, through the back door. The door was shaking, rattling violently, as though someone was trying to force it open. Sarah stumbled backward, her mind racing, her instincts telling her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. She couldn't look away from the door. The handle turned. The door groaned on its hinges, and then, just as suddenly, the rattling stopped. There was silence again. Frozen in place, Sarah's breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. She could hear the wind outside picking up again, the storm reaching its peak, but everything inside felt still, too still. Slowly she made her way to the kitchen drawer, her hands trembling as she pulled out a knife. She didn't know what she was expecting, but her gut told her to prepare for something. She crouched in the corner, keeping an eye on the door. Every sound outside, the wind, the trees snapping, seemed louder now, as though something was lurking just beyond her sight, watching her every move. She heard a faint creak from the attic above, but no footsteps followed. It was just the weight of the old house settling, or at least that's what she told herself. Suddenly, a noise, a soft shuffle, came from behind her. The floorboard creaked just above a whisper. She spun around, but there was nothing. Her mind was playing tricks on her. She had to be imagining things, right? It was just the storm, the isolation, the cabin. But even as she tried to reassure herself, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then a cold breath swept across her neck. A voice, barely audible, whispered in her ear, "You shouldn't have come here alone." She whipped around, the knife now clutched tightly in her hand, but the room was empty. The wind continued to howl, and the snowstorm outside continued to rage, but the fear that had gripped her heart didn't go away. And for the rest of the night, Sarah stayed in that cabin, locked in, alone and terrified, listening to the sounds outside, waiting for something to happen, hoping that by morning the storm would pass and the nightmare would end. But in her gut, she knew that whatever had been outside wasn't just the wind. It had been waiting for her to open the door.